Hello everyone. I played in the fourth and final round of the Martin Laine Memorial last Wednesday at the Wachusett Chess Club in Fitchburg. And I had the black pieces, and going into this round I was tied with Ritvik Pullia at 3 out of 3 for the lead in the tournament, but he didn't attend, so all I needed in this game was a draw to finish in at least a tie for first, and a win would secure me sole first place. I was paired against Geoff Lepoer on board 1, who's rated 1911, and I had the black pieces. He played d4, I played d5, he played knight f3, I went for knight f6, and he played bishop f4, the London system. This is a system in which white establishes a very solid central pawn chain on the dark squares after getting the bishop outside of that chain. And white hopes to use that bishop to exert important influence over the h2 b8 diagonal. I say important because there are times when, in this system, that bishop completely controls that diagonal, but the diagonal turns out not to be worth very much. I played e6, which is probably pretty conservative. I wouldn't be surprised if black can get away with c5, as is popular in the opening database I looked at. But I wanted to neutralize this bishop right away, so I thought I'll just play e6 and I'll stick my bishop on d6 and offer a trade. Knight bd2 from Geoff. Either on this move or the next one, I expected c4 from him, which looked to me to be the most ambitious way for white to play. But he played knight bd2, and after my bishop d6, he played bishop g3. Of course, if he trades on d6, I'll take back with the queen, and as I've mentioned many times in the past, when one pair of bishops is traded off, the queens take up responsibility for controlling the diagonals of that color. So d6 at that point would be a good square for the black queen. Geoff played bishop g3 instead, with the nice idea that should I capture on g3, his recapture with his h-pawn will activate his rook on h1 against my kingside. I castled kingside, and he played c3. Okay, again, I was expecting c4. I don't really know what theory says, or if this is even a theoretical position, but I thought that this would be an ambitious way for white to play. But after he played c3, I thought, okay, white's made enough moves that aren't very ambitious, the pawn being on c3 instead of c4, and the knight for that reason from the queen side coming to d2 instead of c3, and the bishop taking a second move to move back to g3, that black can afford to be more ambitious himself at this point. So I played c5. Having said that, I like to play the move c5 anyway, so I shouldn't pretend that I needed any special justification for it. He played e3, and I played knight c6. And I think at this point it's becoming clear that if white doesn't demonstrate something soon, it's going to be as if black started with the first move, because the pieces are approximately equally well developed, except that black has more space in the center. Geoff played rook c1, with the idea that if the c file opens, he's going to have some influence there. But notice that had he played c4 back here instead, then his rook c1 would be a move that he controls the outcome of, because he'd be able to take on d5 at some point, unleashing his rook's potential. Okay, so knight c6, rook c1, and queen e7. And here I think is a critical moment in the game strategically, because black aims to play e5. And if that happens, if that goes off without a hitch, white's d-pawn may be traded for black's e-pawn, at which point black will have much more space in the center. On top of that, white's king is not yet tucked away safely, which could lead to some tactical problems. So at this point, white has to do something about black's attempt to play e5. And there are a couple ways maybe to do that. One is to stick his knight on e5, and I think this is a pretty normal way to stop black from playing e5. But I'm not sure how things work out for white after bishop takes e5. If the bishop takes back, black is happy to play knight takes e5, and after d takes e5, I think black's center is the more impressive one. But if white plays d takes e5 to begin with instead, preserving the two bishops, his bishop on g3 ends up staring at the e5 pawn. And again, I think black's central position is more impressive. Though here, after, let's say, knight d7, there isn't as much protection on the h7 square, which might allow the light square diagonal moving white pieces to cause some damage over there. And black, in order to deal with that, may feel compelled to play f6 at some point, when a capture from white on f6 would cause the bishop on g3 once again to have a nice open diagonal. An alternative to this, I think, was to play bishop to b5, intending just to remove one of the protectors of the e5 square. I haven't analyzed this, so I don't know if it's a good idea for white or not, but it's an idea. Instead, Geoff played bishop d3, which doesn't really deal with black's threat, so I played e5. And now after his d takes e5 and my knight takes e5, if we pause the sequence for a sec, we can see that black's d5 and c5 pawns are much better than white's e3 and c3 pawns. White's a little bit better developed when it comes to the minor pieces, but one of his developing moves, rook c1, isn't very effective, and his king's still stuck in the center. Geoff made a nice move here, knight takes e5, and after my bishop takes e5, knight f3, making it so that he traded effectively not the knight on f3, but the knight on d2 for my knight on e5, which is a very good trade. I didn't maybe take seriously enough the idea to retreat the dark squared bishop here. I just thought, well, I want to have the next move with initiative in this position, so I'll make a trade and then I'll decide what to do. So I played bishop takes g3. But maybe I should have retreated the bishop to c7, let's say, and continued from there. Because after bishop takes g3 and white's h takes g3, I realized that there was quite a bit of pressure on the h7 square, and that white can add to that by moving his queen out to c2. Having said that, I think this position is still good for black, because after bishop to g4, the black minors have been developed, and the black king, though under some pressure, is safer than the white one. Black intends at some point to play d4, which acts as a cue ball, striking the. I don't know my billiards terms, so I probably shouldn't have tried that. But striking the triangle of balls and sending them flying with the hope that it will cause the white king to come under attack. Geoff played bishop to b1, and I think it's clear that his intent is to develop a battery on the b1 h7 diagonal, but to do it with the queen in front, which is more dangerous. I played rook a to d8, and perhaps at this point was threatening to play d4. White's knight is pinned to his queen, so it'd be very hard for white to capture enough times on d4 to save material when his e-pawn is pinned to his king. Geoff played king f1. I'm confident that a computer will not like this move, but I'm also confident that things are going well enough for black here that we're at the point at which white probably has to kind of throw everything he has at the black king and hope for the best. Because if he makes some normal move like castle kingside, then black is simply in an advantageous position space-wise, and can kind of nurse that advantage and turn it eventually into an advantage of another type, maybe a material advantage. You know what, now that I say that, I think that was probably the better way for white to go. White should have just kind of implicitly admitted that the opening didn't go all that well, and castled kingside here, and then tried to equalize the game. maybe by making a central pawn move. Instead, Geoff played king f1, which gets the king off of the e-file, but makes it so that in the medium term, the white king is a bigger target than the black one. Knight to e4. I improved the position of my knight, though this was a little bit scary because the knight was one of only 2 defenders on the h7 square. There are no tactics here, though, as I think I calculated during the game, because, for example, after rook takes h7, king takes h7, knight g5 check, there's queen takes g5, so there isn't even queen takes g4 at the end. Geoff played queen to c2. There was also a problem for white on the d-file. And this move d4 was going to break things open not only against the white king, but the queen. So Geoff got the queen off of that file and set up a nice battery on this diagonal. And let's see what happened here. Yeah, I was getting a little bit worried about the tactics, but my subconscious was telling me that this is very good for black. So I looked for a way to improve the position of my pieces. I thought about f5, securing the knight on e4, but I thought that once the white knight moves, f3 would be threatened, forking my pieces. And even if it wasn't a fork, it might force the knight away, which might weaken this diagonal. On top of that, by doing that, I'd be weakening the a2, g8 diagonal, which might also cause me problems. So instead I played queen f6, keeping in mind again that idea that the queen should be controlling diagonals of the color of the bishops that have been removed from the board. And here, if the white knight moves away from f3, black may have knight takes g3 check, winning the rook on h1 because of the pin on the f-file. Having said that, I expected a move like knight h4 from white, or at least I was worried about a move like knight h4 or knight h2. Black's not threatening checkmate here because the queen defends f2. And if knight takes g3 check, things aren't as good as they seem, because there's now inadequate protection of h7. So should the white king move somewhere, let's say g1, and black take on h1, white would deliver the pretty powerful queen takes h7 checkmate. Instead, Geoff played rook to h4, and without thinking very much, I played bishop takes f3, although I remember doing kind of a blunder check before I made the move, which is something I often do. And I remind myself when I do that to check the checks my opponent will have, the captures, and the relevant pawn moves. And for some reason, after bishop takes f3, I didn't see rook f4, probably because it's not a check, and it's not a capture, and it's not a pawn move. But yeah, right after I played bishop takes f3, I thought, oh no, what about rook f4? My idea here was that after g takes f3, there's just queen takes f3, and white's going to have a hard time getting this knight off of e4. He can play rook to f4. What was my plan here? I think I wanted to just go queen h1 check, king e2, queen g2, pinning the f-pawn so white can't play f3, and threatening knight takes g3 check. But Geoff played rook f4 immediately, which is a better move, or seemed to me at the time to be a better move, and I struggled for a while here to find a good move for black. I very strongly considered queen h6, intending to meet g takes f3, with queen h1 check, king e2, knight takes g3 check. Pardon me, I'm sorry. But this isn't good, I think, because of king d2. When there isn't even knight f1 check, because after rook takes f1, the black queen can't retake on f1 without allowing queen takes h7 checkmate. And I thought rook takes f3 can be met by queen h1 check, king e2, queen takes g2, when, again, the f-pawn can't currently move to f3, and if the rook moves away, maybe there's knight takes g3 check. But luckily for me, after rook f4, I finally spotted queen a6, which should have been something I was looking at to begin with. That's a check, and well, it just threatens to save black's extra piece. I analyzed it for a while and eventually played it, queen a6 check, and now white has a big problem. If he doesn't find compensation for his piece, then black's just going to go bishop back to h5, bishop back to g6, and eventually win the game. Geoff tried c4, which is interesting, because there are probably variations in which it will undermine the black d5 pawn's protection of the knight on e4, which therefore makes the b1 h7 diagonal weaker. But there aren't immediate threats because the c-pawn is pinned to the white king. So I played bishop back to h5, and Geoff played f3, trying to scare the knight off of e4. And here I think there are many good moves for black. One that Geoff said he was thinking about during the game is knight g5, when it's hard for him to get that knight off of that square in order to take on h7. I'm not sure about that, but I wanted to bring that up because that's something Geoff and I talked about after the game. Another one, which Ralph McNeilage pointed out to me, is knight takes g3. But the move I ended up playing here was something that appealed to me because it involved an interesting tactic. I played queen takes c4 check. And at first this looks really bad, or not really bad, but not great, because after queen takes c4, d takes c4, white can grab the knight on e4 and is doing okay. But after queen takes c4, as played in the game, I played knight d2 check instead, getting the knight off of the vulnerable e5 square and intending to recapture afterwards on c4. Geoff played king f2, I played knight takes c4, and things are really bad for white here at this point. Black is up a piece and a pawn. The pieces for black are better than white's pieces, in particular better than this rook on f4, which isn't doing very much. So there's not much left here for black to do, but of course it's good to play on and try things. Geoff played g4, I played bishop back to g6, and he played e4. But now you can see that this rook on f4 looks even worse. I played knight takes b2, not because it wins a pawn, because it doesn't, but because after rook takes c5, I liked that the knight had access to the d3 square from which it would be attacking both rooks and the king. I played d takes e4, opening up my rook along the d-file, which makes rook d2 check possible, it makes rook d1 possible, it makes knight d3 check possible if I want to trade pieces. And at this point, in light of the fact that black is up material and that white's pieces are not in good shape, and that there isn't much play for white, Geoff resigned. So I finished this tournament with 4 out of 4, gained 11 rating points, getting me back to 2160, which is a plus. What else? That concludes this season at the Wachusett Chess Club. And the next tournament they hold will be the annual championship. I missed qualifying for the championship by 1 game, but as I said last week, that's no big deal because I wouldn't have been able to attend anyway. Let's take a look. Hopefully the box lines up well enough. Yeah, it's not bad. At what that's going to look like. So it's going to be a 7-week, 8-player round-robin tournament, and everybody who didn't qualify will be able to play in the B section, which is the lower section. These are the participants this year: Roger Capello, Paul Godin, Ray Paulson, Bruce Felton, Ritvik, who is a dangerous player right now because he's very young and seems to be gaining many dozens of rating points every tournament. So his rating is probably higher than 1849. Larry Gladding, Ralph McNeilage, and Dave Kuchar. I'm going to be pulling for Ralph because he's the only Worcester player to make it into the championship, and because he and I carpool to Fitchburg on a regular basis. But this is a pretty tough lineup, and it's going to be just interesting to see what happens. There's some pictures down here on their website. This is Gary Broussard and Roger Capello, last year's champions. And on the picture in the picture on the right, you can see several of the players who will be participating this year and who are former champions. I think Ray Paulson is in the tournament, Roger Capello, Paul Godin, Bruce Felton. So quite a few A players and experts. That should be a tough competition. All right, thank you for watching. From now on, I'll only be playing in weekend tournaments, I think. But yeah, hopefully there will be some of those that I can sneak in from time to time, and I will show you my games from those on this channel. Thank you very much.